People like you shouldn't even be on this floor." The words landed sharp and cold, slicing through the quiet hum of the 48th floor boardroom as every head turned at once, suits shifting, chairs creaking softly against polished marble, and the skyline of Manhattan stretching endlessly beyond the glass like a silent witness. Maya Carter stood near the edge of the long conference table, a gray cleaning cloth still in her hand, her uniform plain, her posture steady, as if the weight of the room hadn't pressed down on her at all. Daniel Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Holdings, didn't look at her for long, just long enough to dismiss, his hand already gesturing toward the door as security moved in with quiet efficiency. The meeting had been running on schedule, projections clean, numbers glowing across a 60-inch display mounted on the wall, millions of dollars shifting in neat columns of white and green, until something small, almost invisible, had broken the rhythm. Maya's eyes had caught it first, a single figure buried deep in the report. A decimal misplaced just enough to tilt the balance, subtle but dangerous, like a crack beneath polished glass. She hadn't meant to speak, not at first, not in a room like this where voices like hers were meant to stay silent. But the number stayed there, pulsing in her mind, louder than the quiet orders pushing her out. "That figure, it doesn't balance," she said, her voice calm, not loud, but clear enough to cut through the low ripple of conversation. For a second, no one reacted. Then the laughter came, soft at first, then spreading, a few executives exchanging amused glances, one leaning back in his chair with a smirk, another tapping his pen like the moment was a brief interruption already forgotten. Daniel exhaled through his nose, a faint smile touching his lips, not amused, just dismissive, the kind that came from years of never being questioned. "You're done here," he said, not raising his voice, because he didn't need to. Security stepped closer, the air tightening, the faint scent of leather and cologne mixing with the sterile cool of the room. But Maya didn't move, her gaze still on the screen, the reflection of the numbers flickering in her eyes. Outside, sunlight hit the glass at an angle, casting a pale glow across the table, illuminating dust particles in the air, tiny and suspended, like the entire room was holding its breath without realizing it. Somewhere behind her, heels struck the marble floor in slow, measured steps, echoing from the hallway, unnoticed at first, then growing louder, each step deliberate, each sound pulling attention away from the quiet tension at the table. Maya finally shifted, not stepping back, not rushing, just turning slightly as the conference room doors opened, the light from the corridor spilling in, brighter, sharper, outlining her figure against the polished interior. Daniel's hand paused mid-gesture, just for a fraction of a second, something subtle, almost imperceptible, as the presence in the doorway changed the air in the room, the kind of shift that didn't need words to announce itself, only silence. And for the first time since she spoke, Maya looked up, not at the screen, not at the executives, but straight ahead, her expression unreadable, calm, certain, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment all along. The heels did not rush. They did not hesitate. They carried a rhythm that did not belong to anyone who needed permission to enter. And as the woman stepped fully into the room, the subtle shift became undeniable. Conversations died mid-breath. A pen stopped tapping. A chair creaked once, and then held still, because authority had a sound, and this was it. She was dressed in a charcoal suit cut with precision, nothing loud, nothing excessive. Yet every detail signaled control, and when her eyes swept across the table, they did not search, they assessed. Maya Carter lowered her cleaning cloth slowly onto the edge of the table, fingers releasing it with care, as if closing one roll before stepping into another, her shoulders straightening just a fraction, a quiet recalibration that no one could quite name, but everyone could feel. Daniel Whitmore's jaw tightened, the faint confidence that had framed his posture moments ago now holding in place like something rehearsed, his gaze flicking from the newcomer to Maya and back again, trying to connect a line that did not yet make sense. "We are in the middle of a meeting," he said, voice controlled, but thinner now, less certain than before, the kind of control that comes from habit rather than clarity. The woman did not answer immediately. She simply stepped further inside, the door closing softly behind her with a muted click that echoed longer than it should have, sealing the room into a different kind of silence. one where hierarchy was about to be rewritten. Maya turned fully now, no longer angled toward the exit, no longer framed as someone being dismissed, her presence settling into the space with a calm that did not ask for attention yet commanded it anyway. On the screen behind them, the numbers remained unchanged, still glowing, still wrong. A quiet problem waiting to be acknowledged, and for the first time more than one person looked back at it. Uncertainty flickering where certainty had lived seconds ago. The woman finally spoke, her tone even, measured, carrying across the length of the table without effort. Before you continue, there is a matter that requires immediate clarification. And though the words were simple, they landed with the weight of interruption that could not be ignored. One of the executives shifted in his seat, glancing at Daniel for direction, but Daniel did not respond right away, his attention fixed on Maya now, on the way she stood. No longer shrinking, no longer silent, her expression composed, almost distant, as if she had already stepped ahead of the moment everyone else was still trying to understand. The air conditioning hummed softly above. The city beyond the glass carried on as always, taxis moving in thin lines far below, sunlight sliding across steel and concrete, but inside the room time stretched, each second thick, deliberate. The woman's gaze settled on Maya with recognition, not surprise, not curiosity, but confirmation, and that single look changed everything, even before any name was spoken, even before any title was given. Because recognition from the right person did not need explanation. Maya took one small step forward, not toward the door, but toward the center of the table, her hands now free, her posture aligned with a confidence that had been hidden in plain sight. And somewhere in the room a quiet realization began to take shape, fragile but unstoppable, that the line between who belonged and who did not had never been what it seemed. No one asked her name, but the room was already waiting for it. The woman in the charcoal suit stepped closer to the head of the table, placing a thin leather folder down with quiet precision, the sound soft but final, like a period at the end of a sentence no one had finished yet. Daniel Whitmore straightened slightly, his fingers brushing the edge of the polished surface as if grounding himself. His voice measured but strained beneath the surface. You are interrupting a scheduled executive session. Yet even as he spoke, the authority behind his words felt thinner, stretched against something he did not yet understand. The woman's eyes did not leave Maya, not once. And when she finally spoke, her tone carried the calm certainty of someone who did not need permission to continue. This session is now under review. A statement, not a request, and the shift it created was immediate, subtle yet undeniable. Like air pressure changing before a storm, Maya reached into the pocket of her uniform and pulled out a small badge, simple, unassuming, the kind of object that could be overlooked in any other context. But here, in this moment, it carried weight. She did not rush, did not dramatize. She simply held it between her fingers for a second before placing it on the table, the plastic catching the light from the windows, reflecting it in a thin, sharp line. Across the room, someone leaned forward, eyes narrowing, trying to read the text from a distance. Another executive shifted, the faint sound of fabric moving suddenly loud in the silence. Daniel's gaze dropped to the badge, then lifted back to Maya's face, searching, calculating, his mind racing through possibilities that did not align with what he had already decided about her minutes ago. There must be some confusion, he said, the words careful, controlled, but no longer dismissive, because confusion meant uncertainty, and uncertainty meant risk. Maya did not respond immediately. She only met his gaze, steady, unflinching, the kind of stillness that did not come from defiance but from certainty, the kind that does not need to prove itself. The woman beside her opened the leather folder, sliding a document across the table toward Daniel, the paper gliding over the polished surface with a soft whisper, stopping just within his reach. There is no confusion, she said, her voice even, effective immediately. All financial records associated with this division are subject to independent audit. And with that, the room seemed to contract, the walls holding closer, the distance between people shrinking as the implications settled in. Daniel's hand hovered above the document, not touching it yet, his reflection faintly visible in the glossy table beneath, a version of himself that looked just as composed, just as controlled, but no longer certain. Behind him, the screen still displayed the numbers Maya had pointed out. Unchanged, uncorrected, now no longer just an oversight but a question, one that was beginning to echo through the room louder than any voice. Maya finally moved again, stepping forward just enough to align herself with the table, no longer at its edge, no longer outside its center, her presence now impossible to ignore, her voice calm when it came, clear and measured. "The discrepancy is not a rounding error," she said, her eyes briefly flicking to the screen before returning to Daniel. "It is a pattern." And that single word landed heavier than anything before it, because patterns meant intention, and intention meant accountability. And for the first time since the meeting began, Daniel Whitmore did not have an immediate response. The word lingered in the air, heavy, precise, impossible to dismiss. And for a moment no one moved, not even the faint rustle of paper or the quiet tapping of a pen, because a pattern was not an accident. It was intention stretched across time. Daniel Whitmore finally lowered his hand onto the document, fingertips brushing the edge before pulling it closer, his eyes scanning the first page quickly, then slower. The confidence in his posture tightening rather than expanding, like a structure under pressure. Across the table, one of the senior analysts leaned forward, squinting at the screen again, this time not with casual interest but with focus, as if seeing the numbers for the first time without assumption, while another executive adjusted his glasses, scrolling through his tablet with a subtle urgency that had not been there minutes ago. Maya Carter remained still, her presence grounded, not looming, not shrinking, simply occupying space with a quiet authority that did not demand attention but held it. The woman beside her closed the folder with a soft, deliberate motion, her gaze shifting now to the rest of the room, including them in a reality that had already begun to change. "We have identified multiple entries over the past 6 quarters that follow the same structure," she said, her voice even, each word placed with care. "Each instance redirects small percentages across subsidiary accounts, individually insignificant, collectively substantial." And the explanation did not need emphasis because the implication carried its own weight. Daniel looked up, his expression controlled but no longer relaxed, his mind working through layers of information, trying to frame a response that would restore balance. "If there are discrepancies, they will be addressed internally," he said, the words measured, but they landed softer than before. Lacking the finality he was used to, Maya's eyes met his again, steady, unyielding, internal. "Review would not have flagged this," she replied calmly, not as a challenge, but as a fact, and the simplicity of her tone made it harder to argue against. The screen behind them shifted as someone remotely pulled up additional data, columns expanding, figures multiplying, the clean presentation fracturing into something more complex, more revealing, and with every new line the room seemed to grow quieter, as if sound itself was retreating to make space for understanding. A chair moved slightly, the subtle scrape echoing longer than it should have, and someone exhaled slowly, the kind of breath taken when realization settles in deeper than comfort allows. Daniel leaned back, just enough to create distance between himself and the document, his reflection in the glass table now sharper, clearer, showing a man still composed, still controlled, but now calculating from a different position, one where certainty had been replaced by scrutiny. Maya stepped closer to the table, not abruptly, not aggressively, but with intention, her hand lifting to gesture lightly toward the screen. "The variance appears in intervals that align with quarterly reporting cycles," she said, her voice steady, guiding attention without forcing it, which means it was timed. And that word shifted the weight again, because timing implied design, and design implied awareness. The woman in the charcoal suit nodded once, a small acknowledgement that did not break the flow but reinforced it. And around the table, eyes moved between Maya, the screen, and Daniel, the center of gravity no longer fixed where it had been at the start. Outside, the sunlight had shifted slightly, casting longer reflections across the glass, stretching lines of light over the table like quiet markers of passing time. And inside, the meeting that had once been controlled by schedule and authority was now governed by something else entirely, something slower, heavier, and far less forgiving. Daniel's fingers tightened briefly against the edge of the document before relaxing again, a controlled motion, almost invisible, but enough to reveal that the ground beneath him had shifted, and for the first time, he was not the one deciding where the conversation would go next. Silence settled deeper now, not empty, but heavy, layered with the quiet realization that the room had shifted beyond recovery, and no one could return it to what it had been 10 minutes ago. Daniel Whitmore remained seated, his posture still composed, but the stillness carried effort now, a controlled resistance against something unraveling beneath the surface. His eyes moved again across the document, slower this time, tracing the highlighted entries, the repeating structures, the subtle red flags that no longer looked subtle when placed side by side. Across from him, an executive cleared his throat softly, then stopped, as if even that small interruption felt misplaced, while another closed his tablet halfway, no longer pretending to follow the original agenda. Maya Carter did not rush the moment. She let it stretch, let the evidence settle into the room the way light settles into glass, gradual, undeniable. The woman in the charcoal suit stepped slightly to the side, giving Maya the center without announcing it, a silent transfer of focus that everyone noticed even if no one acknowledged it. These entries were not isolated. Maya continued, her voice steady, her tone unchanged, as if she were reading something already known rather than exposing something new. They follow a consistent pathway through internal channels that require executive-level authorization, and the phrase landed carefully, deliberately, narrowing the field of responsibility without raising her voice. Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, his fingers pressing flat against the document as if anchoring himself to it. His response measured but thinner than before. Authorization does not imply intent, he said, each word placed with precision, attempting to regain structure, to reframe control. Maya inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the statement without agreeing to it. Intent is determined by repetition and timing, she replied, her gaze briefly shifting to the screen again where the data now stood expanded, undeniable, and both are present here. And that quiet confirmation removed the last layer of abstraction, a faint shift moved through the room. Not panic, not yet, but awareness, the kind that changes how every person sits, breathes, listens. One of the senior managers leaned back slowly, exhaling through his nose, his eyes no longer on Daniel but on the numbers, as if distancing himself from a structure he had once trusted. Outside, the city moved without interruption, sunlight reflecting off distant windows, traffic flowing in quiet patterns far below, indifferent to what was unfolding above. Inside, the air felt denser, the controlled climate no longer neutral but pressing, holding every word in place. Daniel glanced up again, this time not searching for dismissal but for alignment, for something he could use to stabilize the room. But the usual cues were gone, replaced by quiet observation, by people waiting rather than following. The woman in the charcoal suit stepped forward just enough to place her hand lightly on the table, not to interrupt, but to mark a transition. This review will proceed under independent oversight, she said, her voice calm. Final, leaving no space for negotiation. All findings will be documented and submitted accordingly. And the structure she provided did not restore control, it redefined it. Maya remained still for a moment longer, then reached for the remote resting near the edge of the table, her movement unhurried, deliberate, as she advanced the display to the next set of figures, deeper, more detailed, the pattern widening with each layer revealed. The room did not react with sound, only with attention, focused, sharpened, because now there was no uncertainty left about what they were looking at, only the question of what it meant and who it belonged to. Daniel's reflection in the glass surface held steady, but the version beneath it, the one not shaped by posture and habit, had already begun to shift, and for the first time since the meeting began, he was no longer leading the outcome, he was waiting for it. The next slide did not arrive with a dramatic sound, only a soft shift of light across the screen, but the impact was heavier than anything before it, because this time the numbers were not abstract, they were connected, linked across timelines, accounts, and approvals, forming a quiet map that no one in the room could pretend not to see. Maya Carter stood beside the display, the faint glow reflecting along the edge of her face. Her expression unchanged, not hardened, not triumphant, simply focused, as if this moment was not about proving something, but about revealing what had always been there. No one interrupted her now, not with laughter, not with dismissal, only the subtle sound of breathing, measured, careful, as if even that could disrupt the fragile clarity settling over the room. Daniel Whitmore did not look at her immediately. His eyes remained on the screen, following the highlighted lines that moved across quarters and fiscal reports, the repetition now impossible to separate from intent. His posture still upright, but no longer anchored in certainty, his hands resting flat against the table as though keeping himself steady against something shifting beneath him. Each transfer was below the reporting threshold, Maya said, her voice low but precise, guiding attention without forcing it. Individually, they appear routine, but together they form a consistent extraction pattern, and the word extraction lingered, heavier than any number, because it translated data into consequence. A quiet movement came from the far end of the table as one executive leaned forward, elbows resting on the surface, his gaze narrowing not at Maya, but at the data, the kind of focus that comes too late, after trust has already been assumed. Another executive removed his glasses, wiping them slowly, not because they were dirty, but because the gesture gave him a moment to process what he was now seeing differently. The woman in the charcoal suit remained still, her presence steady, her silence intentional, allowing the weight of the information to settle without interruption. Outside, a cloud passed across the sun, dimming the brightness in the room just enough to soften the reflections on the glass, turning sharp lines into muted ones, as if even the light was adjusting to the shift inside. Maya reached forward and zoomed into a specific entry, the numbers expanding, the pathway clearer, a series of approvals aligning with timestamps that no longer felt random. The approvals correspond with executive clearance windows, she continued, her tone unchanged, which limits access to a very small group. And the narrowing focus did not need to name anyone. It already pointed. Daniel finally leaned forward again, closer to the document in front of him, his eyes moving more quickly now, not scanning, but searching, looking for something to counter, something to reposition the narrative, but each line he read seemed to confirm rather than contradict. His voice, when it came, was quieter than before, controlled but lacking the sharp edge it once carried. These processes are complex. They involve multiple layers. A statement that once would have reinforced authority, now sounding like distance. Maya nodded slightly, acknowledging the complexity without yielding to it. Complexity does not remove accountability, she replied, her gaze steady, not confrontational, simply present, and the simplicity of her words made them harder to deflect. The room remained still, but the stillness had changed. It was no longer neutral, it was observant, attentive, waiting, and within that silence, roles had shifted, not announced, not declared, but understood. Daniel's reflection in the polished table no longer matched the man above it. The image below showing something quieter, more uncertain, as if the version of control he had carried into the room had been left behind somewhere between the first dismissal and this moment of recognition. Maya stepped back half a pace, not retreating, but creating space for what came next, her hands resting lightly at her sides, her posture calm, grounded, as if she had already done what she came to do, and now the room itself would have to decide what to do with the truth she had placed in front of it. The room did not react all at once. It shifted in fragments, in small, almost invisible ways that only became clear when they began to accumulate. A chair that had been angled toward Daniel Whitmore turned slightly toward the screen instead. A tablet that once mirrored his presentation now displayed Maya Carter's data, and eyes that had followed his lead now moved independently, scanning, comparing, questioning. The center of gravity had moved, not loudly, not abruptly, but permanently. Daniel felt it before he fully understood it, a subtle loss of alignment that no amount of posture could correct, his shoulders still squared, his expression still controlled, but the quiet certainty that once filled the space around him had thinned into something fragile. He looked again at the figures, at the repeating intervals, at the timestamps that matched access windows only a few could authorize. And this time he did not search for error. He searched for explanation, for a narrative that could reframe what he was seeing into something manageable. These conclusions are premature, he said, his voice steady but lower now, as if measured against the silence rather than dominating it. There are internal protocols that could account for this pattern. And the words carried logic, structure, but not conviction. Maya did not interrupt him. She allowed the statement to settle, to exist fully before responding, her gaze steady, her presence unchanged. Then those protocols will be part of the review, she replied, her tone even. Not dismissive, not confrontational, simply extending the process beyond his control. The woman in the charcoal suit stepped forward just enough to reinforce the shift, her voice calm, final. All relevant protocols will be examined under independent verification. And with that, the space for internal explanation narrowed further. A faint sound came from the far end of the table as one executive closed his folder completely, not out of disinterest, but as if acknowledging that the meeting they had entered was no longer the one they were in. Another leaned back slowly, his eyes moving between Daniel and Maya, recalibrating, reassessing, not choosing sides but recognizing a change in authority. The screen behind them remained illuminated, the numbers unchanged, but their meaning had deepened, expanded, no longer static data but a structure under scrutiny. Daniel's hand moved slightly across the document, turning a page with controlled precision, the motion deliberate, practiced, but slower than before. Each line he read reinforcing a reality that did not bend easily to interpretation. His reflection in the polished table remained composed, but the version beneath it carried something quieter, more uncertain, a subtle fracture between appearance and understanding. Maya stepped closer to the table again, not to dominate the space, but to anchor it, her presence steady, her voice calm when she spoke. The pattern does not rely on assumption, she said, her eyes briefly meeting his before returning to the data. It is supported by traceable movement across accounts, approvals, and timing. And the clarity of her words left little room for ambiguity. The room absorbed that clarity. In silence, not resisting it, not challenging it, but adjusting around it, like a structure shifting to accommodate a new foundation. Outside, the light had softened further, the sun moving lower, casting longer reflections across the glass, stretching shadows along the floor, marking the passage of time that no one inside had acknowledged. Daniel leaned back slightly, the distance between him and the table increasing by inches. But those inches carried weight, creating space not for authority, but for realization. He looked at Maya again, not as an interruption, not as an anomaly, but as the source of the shift itself. And in that look there was something new, not agreement, not yet, but recognition. The meeting had not ended. No one had declared a conclusion, but the outcome had begun to form, quietly, steadily, in the space between data and silence. And for the first time since the moment he had ordered her out, Daniel Whitmore was no longer certain that he understood the room he was sitting in. The silence no longer felt uncertain. It felt decided, like a line had been drawn without anyone needing to say it out loud, and everyone in the room knew which side they were now standing on. Daniel Whitmore sat still, not frozen, but contained, his posture carefully held together as if any sudden movement might reveal more than he intended. His eyes no longer scanning for mistakes, but lingering on the details he could not dismiss. The repeated approvals, the aligned timestamps, the quiet consistency that no longer allowed for coincidence. Across the table, an executive who had once nodded at every word Daniel spoke now leaned forward with a different kind of focus, his attention fixed on the data rather than the man, while another shifted his chair slightly back, creating space, not physically necessary but symbolically clear, a subtle distancing from the center that had once defined the room. Maya Carter remained steady, her presence calm, her expression composed, not hardened by the shift, not softened by it either, simply grounded in the role she had already stepped into, her eyes moving once more to the screen before returning to Daniel, not with challenge, but with clarity. The woman in the charcoal suit closed the final tab on the display, the screen dimming slightly as the presentation settled into its last frame, the numbers no longer changing, no longer expanding, just existing, complete, undeniable. "The review will proceed immediately," she said, her voice quiet but final, each word placed with the kind of authority that did not require reinforcement. "Access to all related systems will be restricted pending verification," and the statement did not raise tension. It confirmed it, giving structure to what had already been understood. Daniel exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible, but enough to mark the shift inside him, his hands resting flat against the table now, not gripping, not anchoring, just still, as if he had reached the point where resistance no longer served him. He looked at Maya again, this time without dismissal, without calculation, simply seeing her, the person he had overlooked, the voice he had tried to remove, now standing at the center of the outcome he could not control. "If there are findings," he said, his tone measured, quieter than before, "they will be addressed." And though the words were familiar, they no longer carried the same weight, no longer defined the direction, only acknowledged it. Maya inclined her head slightly, not in agreement, not in submission, but in recognition of the moment as it was, her voice calm when she responded. "The findings are already here," she said, her gaze steady. "Now it is a matter of what is done with them." And the simplicity of that statement settled into the room more deeply than anything else had. No one spoke after that. Not immediately, because there was nothing left to interrupt, nothing left to argue. Only the quiet process of understanding what had shifted and what would follow. Outside, the light had turned warmer, the sun lowering toward the horizon, casting long reflections across the glass that stretched over the table and across the floor, softening the sharp edges of the room, while inside, the clarity remained, unsoftened, precise. Daniel leaned back slightly, not in retreat, but in acceptance of a space that no longer moved with him, his reflection in the glass now matching the stillness of the moment, composed but changed, no longer leading, no longer directing, simply present within a structure that had moved beyond him. Maya stepped back just half a pace, not leaving, not disengaging, but allowing the room to settle around what had been revealed, her hands resting at her sides, her posture steady, her presence quiet yet undeniable. And in that stillness, without any announcement, without any closing statement, the meeting reached its true conclusion, not with words, but with the silence that followed them. The room did not erupt, it did not fracture. It simply settled into a silence so complete it felt almost physical, like the air itself had thickened and wrapped around every person in it. No one reached for their phone, no one whispered, no one attempted to redirect the moment, because there was nothing left to redirect, only something to absorb. The screen remained dimmed now, the final frame of data still visible, no longer changing, no longer needing to. Its purpose already fulfilled. Maya Carter stood where she was, not at the head of the table, not at the edge, but somewhere in between, a position she had not taken by force, but by presence, by truth, by the quiet weight of what she had revealed. Daniel Whitmore remained seated, his posture composed but no longer guarded, his shoulders slightly lowered. The tension that had once defined him now softened into something quieter, something more reflective. His eyes moved once more across the room, not searching for control, but observing, taking in the subtle shifts, the changed alignments, the way people now held themselves differently, the way attention no longer centered on him. He looked back at Maya, and this time there was no resistance in the glance, no calculation, only acknowledgement, the kind that comes too late to change the past but not too late to understand it. The woman in the charcoal suit gathered the folder from the table, her movements precise, unhurried, closing it with a soft click that echoed lightly in the stillness, a sound that marked not an end, but a transition. She turned toward the door, pausing only briefly, as if allowing the room one final moment to settle before the next phase began. Outside, the sunlight had shifted into a warmer tone, casting long, golden reflections across the glass walls, stretching across the polished floor in quiet lines that moved slowly with time. Inside, those reflections touched the edge of the table, the surface where Maya's badge still rested, its simple plastic catching the light, reflecting it in a small, steady glow. Maya reached for it without haste, her fingers closing around it gently, not as a gesture of triumph, but as something practical, necessary, a part of her role, and as she lifted it, the reflection disappeared, leaving the surface of the table clear, unbroken. Daniel watched the motion, small as it was, and something in his expression shifted again, not visibly dramatic, but enough to mark the moment as final, as understood. He did not speak, not because he could not, but because there was nothing left to say that would change what had already been set into motion. One by one, the others in the room began to move, not hurried, not chaotic, but deliberate, gathering their materials, closing devices, standing in quiet acknowledgement of a meeting that had ended without a formal close. Maya turned slightly